Hello, my name is Mr. Chipman. This is 5.7 Meat Production Methods. Three words that I never thought I'd say, but here I am teaching Unit 5 of AP Environmental Science. Normally I teach biology and AP Biology at Murray High School in Murray, Kentucky. But here we are, 5.7 Meat Production Methods. Let's talk about meat production methods. There's some meat. So interesting thing about meat production. And we know this because we talked about trophic levels and we talked about 10% rule and all that business before. Producing the same amount of calories of meat takes around 20 times more land than producing crops. And that has to do with the 10% rule, right? It takes a lot more land, a lot more resources to sustain the animals than it would just to build the crops or grow the crops. You get the idea, right? And demands more water, generates more greenhouse gas emissions. And so these are just facts. This is not a disputable sort of thing. I'm not suggesting that we stop eating meat or anything like that. I'm just saying it takes more resources to grow meat than it does to grow plants because meat eats plants, right? You get the idea. So let's talk about a few things coming from this. There is this thing, I don't know how this abbreviation is said, CAFOs, but it stands for concentrated animal feeding operations. Right, and you can see that that's what's going on here. This is a very concentrated animal feeding operation. This is basically industrial feedlots where animals are confined in a high density. There's some chickens. We get chicken houses all over the place here, less than we used to, but we'll definitely see them. Of course, the benefits here, they're very efficient. They're generally less expensive than the alternative, which we will talk about. Rapid weight gain before slaughter, which is really all that meat production is about, is getting us an appropriate amount of weight on an animal before they're slaughtered for consumption. Right? Obvious drawbacks to this, not obvious, but let's look at some of the drawbacks. Typically, animals are fed grain-based diets instead of something that is natural grazing. It's like a chicken, for instance, will eat bugs and grass unless you feed it corn. Then it will eat the corn. Right? It likes corn. Corn is like candy to it. Not candy corn, but corn is candy to chickens, right? And they'll eat it, but they'll also eat grass and bugs and stuff like that. They'll get fatter off the corn. They'll get bigger, which is, of course, people like bigger chickens, right? We like more chicken on the bone. This generates another drawback, of course, it generates large amounts of organic waste. Runoff contaminates water, nutrients and pathogens and so forth. This is not good for the environment around it. Typically requires antibiotics and hormones because of the amount of the concentration of animal sickness is more likely to spread. And so they're constantly having to be treated with things which can create a resistance and create super strains of bugs. We just saw this with a flu that went around with birds and killed a lot of them. We had an egg shortage. Get the idea. Obviously, lower animal welfare. I don't know that chickens experience happiness or contentment or anything like that. But I would imagine that these chickens are less content than ones that are free range. Hey, those cows are all very interested in the cameraman. So free range grazing has to do with exactly what you think, right? It has to do with animals being allowed to graze and sort of have more land. They're not free, and that those cows can't take off across those mountains on an adventure or anything like that. They're not going to go over the mountains into the Carrick or any of that sort of thing. It's going to happen into the Misty Mountains or anything like that. They're just going to be out there eating the grass, right? But this is better than having them confined in stalls and feeding them corn. This is more natural. This is the waste then acts like a natural fertilizer, so you have less problem with that. A lot better. Chickens can do this, pigs, whatever, free range grazing. Of course, the drawbacks, this requires a whole lot more land than natural or than a concentrated feedlot. Higher cost to consumers because of the increased cost of production, which makes sense. And overgrazing risks can cause soil erosion and can lead to something called desertification. I wonder if that's how you pronounce that, desertification, which is effectively making a desert out of an area that would normally be, because you eliminate all of the vegetation and then you eliminate the ability for that place to produce vegetation again. Leads to erosion and all that kind of thing. It's not good, not good at all. Some places are going to be more predisposed to this depending on the type of soil that is there. And so, what are some of the answers to this? Consuming less meat, of course, is going to have a lot of benefits for the planet. Lower greenhouse gas emissions, conserving fresh water. A ton of our water goes to feeding our animals because they have to drink water as well. Decrease reliance on antibiotics and growth hormones in these populations, preserving topsoil, reducing land degradation. There's a lot of things that could be good. Of course, you could see the other side of this as well. And so, just something to think about. Not taking a side one way or the other, just sort of trying to present the options that are available to us. Here's a couple of examples. This is an example of an algal bloom that is happening in this pond. This is a cow poop pond, right? That's what I call them. All the runoff has produced these algal blooms, and this algal bloom will kill this pond, right? It will cover the pond from getting sunlight, and then the organisms that require sunlight in order to live will die, and then the organisms that eat those organisms will also die, and the only thing that you'll have left will be algae and a pond with very little oxygen in it, which is generally not good, right? Generally not a good idea. This is some desertification that's happening in the Sahel region of Africa. These are semi-arid lands, and so they're already dry, but they do have some grasses on them, but allowing animals to graze at increased rates has exacerbated a problem that they would already be having, the idea of dry soils, and you can see it's extremely dry. There no vegetation to hold that moisture is going to cause some problems. Let's look at some practice problems. So this type of problem is looking at a data set, right? Maybe looking at a graph or something like that. A data set shows that producing 1 kilogram of beef requires far more land and water than producing 1 kilogram of wheat. Which environmental implication best explains this difference? All right, so we are looking at the idea here that it requires a lot more wheat to feed the beef, and this has to do with the 10% rule and all that sort of thing. And of course, everything that it requires to raise beef than it does to raise wheat. So let's go find that in ABCD. Meat production requires less land, but more chemical fertilizer than crop. No, it doesn't. Meat production is less efficient than plant-based agriculture, leading to higher land and water energy use per calorie produced. It's a general statement that is true, but I'm not 100% convinced. Let's go look at the other ones. Free-range meat requires fewer resources. It doesn't. It requires more. Meat production lowers greenhouse. No, it doesn't. B is the correct answer because the other ones are wrong. Again, I like this question. I think it's a good question, but sometimes it is good to read all the choices. This is 5.7. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching.